Good morning. My name is Teresina Bartley, and I am the NASW California Chapter's Inland Empire Chair for Region F. And I'm here this morning to interview Mrs. Anita J. Mackey, who is our oldest living social worker with NASW. Mrs. Mackey, can you tell us what inspired you or who inspired you to become a social worker?
Actually, to become a social worker, I was reared in a family by a father. His mother died when I was 10. And he always had the idea that you lived in this world to help people. And my father learned Spanish because he said most of the people he would be reading as a group would be Spanish people. I didn't even learn Spanish to be speaking fluently, but enough to understand and to comprehend. I also saw that they were thinking too much that people of color were on welfare. And I wanted to realize for myself, where did that notion come from? And I saw because of discrimination, and I saw it early. I saw early in life that no matter how well a person was trained, that did not necessarily mean that the things which he met, which were obstacles, would be removed. And I saw early in life that color was a very, very important matter in terms of how one understood it in order to be able to achieve.
How long have you been a social worker?
I decided to become a social worker in 1939 after I was married for 2 years when I went to Chicago. And I can't say too much about Chicago. That was the first time I'd ever seen that many of my people in my life. And I learned early that you were either in school or had a job, a good job, or you weren't going anywhere. And so I learned early in Chicago from the black community that I could not just do nothing. Although I was teaching at I'm Seventh-day Adventist at a Seventh-day Adventist elementary school because I already had my bachelor's degree. But I decided that if I was going to be in Chicago, that I had to be able to make a contribution, because the blacks in Chicago I found were very energetic and contributing.
What would you say your biggest accomplishment was as a social worker?
Now that's a hard question. I would say my biggest accomplishment was doing my best to motivate those with whom I worked. I never saw anybody as a loser. I never felt that the station in which I found a person, I found many people on welfare, but I did not condemn them for being on welfare because things were different at the time in terms of people getting jobs. But I felt that I should try to talk to them to find out what I thought was their potential.
Okay.
And I encouraged many of them to go to school.
Okay, wonderful. Back in Chicago, so what would you say your biggest challenge was as a social worker?
Actually, I think one of the biggest challenges is to help people to understand their own potential.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you continue to press people down,
Mm-hmm.
they begin to think they aren't anybody. And so I found that my biggest challenge was helping each one with whom I worked to know that he had a higher potential than what he or she saw himself.
So, this year's theme is Social Work Paves the Way for Change.
Oh, yeah.
And you're 101 years young, and you were a social worker for more than 60 years, I understand.
Yes.
So in keeping with that theme, what would you say, or what do you see or foresee the biggest challenge for the social workers of today?
That they realize that the world hasn't changed much in terms of how we look upon people in need and who are poor and who are uneducated. So we must not see ourselves as in the bracket of above everybody. We must still remember that the poor will be with us always.
Okay.
And just because a person is poor does not mean that he doesn't have a good brain. And so we must help each person to reach their highest potential. And that's what I really felt good about. I made, in my talks to people, think about themselves and what they really wanted to do. And many never had thought about what they wanted to do or what they felt that they could do. And I tried to inspire them to think that. And I feel that my coming back in those early days as a social worker and female with a master's degree really surprised them. Also, I found among the older ones that they were a little skittish. They wondered whether or not that I was going to be too authoritative and take the role as what they had seen, how society had treated them, as that they were nobody, and that I was an authority figure that was going to keep them where they were. And they changed. Now, one thing I did do, I had a new Buick at that time. I did not park my car in the neighborhood. I parked outside the neighborhood and walked my district.
That sounds like a challenge. That would be for, I remember when I was a home health and palliative care social worker, that was a major challenge for me, is some of the neighborhoods that I would have to go in and see my clients. Where do I park my car? What do I leave in my car? What do I take with me? So that's interesting to say that.
But I left my car. I didn't care if they damaged it or whatnot, but I didn't want them to get the impression immediately that I felt myself, or they saw myself, better than they.
Yes.
Better than they. And I was careful in my dress. I must say that I'm very disappointed the way social workers dress today.
Oh, how so?
But they don't dress in a professional manner. Many of them that I see are very careless in their dress, and I feel that we should be an example, not overly dressed, but dressed well. And that's the thing that disappoints me the most. We don't look like professional people when we're in the district.
I do agree. You go to school, you spend all that time in the books, and you pay all that money to get a master's degree, and so we are professionals, and so we should look that way, and I do appreciate you saying that.
Social workers do not look enough like professionals for me when they're going to it. That doesn't mean overdressed. It's strange. All my life, being reared in a culture in Riverside, which was a very rich community when I grew up. In San Bernardino, they looked at it as a workplace because of the railroad, except for the fact that my father was a blacksmith at the Santa Fe Railroad, and so was my brother a blacksmith, and my brother ended up being the head blacksmith of the Santa Fe Railroad division in San Bernardino County.
An accomplishment.
Yes. And I come from work. I'm the first one in my family to have a college degree, and my other brother was an electrician who worked on the Golden Gate Bridge as an electrician. So I feel that I come from a very humble background, and my father pointed out, his mother died and I was 10, that once you feel that you are better than those around you, you have lost your influence.
Wow. Well, I know that you've been a social worker for some 6 decades plus, and I did read somewhere where you kept your license current until 2013. That's a very long time.
And I am still on inactive status.
Wow.
And
You're very proud to be a social worker. I have it
right now. I plan to be on inactive status. I plan to be the oldest licensed clinical social worker in the state of California.
I believe that you are, and that's why we featured you on our website for NASW, California chapter. Now, in closing, would you? I saw some of your videos prior to meeting you, and I was very, very impressed. But there was something that resonated with me. You talked about the 4 guiding principles that you live by and that you work by. And would you be willing to share that with us this morning?
Yes. But first, I think it's very interesting, and the doctors all the time. Here I am. I have no high blood pressure. Never have. Then I jokingly have said, I'm not too sure I haven't given it to other people. But I try always to stay calm. My father studied law, only to be knowledgeable. And he said, one of the things the law book said, he who loses his head loses his case. And so I've always, so I said, well, let me figure this out so I can help myself. So I thought about, what's the problem? What needs to be done? What can I do about it? And when do I get started?
That should be the creed for all social workers across America. Well, Mrs. Mackey, it's been a pleasure meeting with you this morning and sharing with you, and I'm glad that you shared with us.
Yes.
And we'll be excited to see you. You will be our honored guest at our March the 2nd. It's our celebrating Social Work Month. It is a Social Work Month awards dinner, and we'll be so glad to see you there. And thank you so much.